The wooden stairs creaked as Miranda and I walked down to the basement.
I can't wait for you to see what Grandma and I do for fun.
Miranda looked at me, her eyes twinkling. Are you going to give me a hint? I smiled at her. She took my hand and squeezed it gently.
Well, we capture exquisite, rare things.
When we reached the bottom of the basement, Miranda stopped. She stroked the side of my face and turned my face so our eyes met.
You have the most gorgeous eyes I've ever seen.
It was as though something clicked in my mind and I looked around the basement. A sense of dread slowly rose up in me. Before I could respond, something hit me over the head and I fell to the ground with a thud. Hey, my name is Dimitri. Like and subscribe to our amazing channel. Tap that notification bell so that you will know when we post new stories. As soon as I saw Miranda, I knew that I wanted her. There were numerous rumors at the high school that she and her grandmother were into some weird stuff. But I mean, who doesn't have something weird about their family? It took me about a month before I was able to muster up all my courage to not only approach her, but to ask her out. I sweated nervously as she looked at me before she smiled and said yes. After dating a few months, I invited Miranda over to meet my parents. As we pulled up to my driveway, Miranda looked at me nervously.
Do I look okay? Do you think they'll like me?
I took her hand and kissed it softly. My parents are going to love you. How could they not? Dinner was a hit. My parents loved Miranda and made her feel at home. After dessert, Miranda said that it was time for her to head home. Mom and Dad hugged her. Mom held her hand and said,
I can't wait to meet your grandmother. Maybe we could have both of you over next time.
Miranda smiled and nodded, and we left. As I dropped her off at her grandma's, she turned to me.
How about you come over next Saturday to meet Grandma? She's been longing to meet you.
She smiled. I'd love to. Do you need me to bring anything?
Just bring those pretty eyes of yours.
Miranda leaned in and kissed me before she hopped out of the car. I waited until she was safe inside the house before driving off. As I drove home, I couldn't help but wonder if Miranda's grandmother would welcome me with open arms as my parents welcomed her granddaughter. The next few days were nerve-wracking. Meeting Miranda's grandmother was a huge deal for me, and I hoped it would turn out as successful as I wanted it to be. I mean, you only get to make a first impression once, and I wanted the first time that we met to be memorable for both of them. On the day, I pulled up to Miranda's grandmother's house at 6 p.m. sharp. I walked with a bouquet of flowers for Miranda and one for her grandmother. I nervously adjusted my clothing before I rang the doorbell. A few seconds later, Miranda opened it and she greeted me with a warm smile and stepped aside for me to enter.
Hey, handsome. Hope you brought your appetite.
I smiled and handed Miranda her bouquet of flowers.
Thank you, babe. I'll go and put these in some water.
As she walked away, she yelled,
Grandma, our special guest has arrived.
A wrinkled older woman with short gray hair and clothing 2 sizes too big hobbled the living room. Her voice cracked as she spoke.
Good night, Dimitri. Miranda has told me quite a lot about you.
Good night, ma'am. I hope that she said only good things. Miranda's grandmother smiled and nodded. I got you these, I said as I handed over the flowers. Miranda told me how much you loved lilies. Her grandmother took the flowers and smelled them.
Will you take an old lady's hand?
She extended her hand and placed it on the crook of my elbow.
Let's eat.
She smiled as we strolled towards the kitchen. After dinner, Miranda eagerly wanted to show me something in the basement. As a loving boyfriend, also hoping to spend some time alone away from her grandmother, I accepted the venture to head to the basement. The wooden stairs creaked as Miranda and I walked down to the basement.
I can't wait for you to see what Grandma and I do for fun.
Miranda looked at me, her eyes twinkling. Are you going to give me a hint? I smiled at her. She took my hand and squeezed it gently.
Well, we capture exquisite, rare things.
When we reached the bottom of the basement, Miranda stopped. She stroked the side of my face and turned my face so our eyes met.
You have the most gorgeous eyes I've ever seen.
It was as though something clicked in my mind, and I looked around the basement. A sense of dread slowly rose up in me. Before I could respond, something hit me over the head and I fell to the ground with a thud. I opened my eyes groggily and shook my head as I tried to focus on my surroundings. I was tightly tied to a chair.
Oh, you're up finally,
Miranda said as she twirled in a chair in front of me.
It wouldn't have been as much fun if you were still unconscious.
I pulled against the ropes. Miranda, I don't understand. What are you doing?
As I said before, Grandma and I have this special hobby where we collect rare and exquisite things. The best part is sometimes we even get paid. Do you know how much we are being offered for just one of your eyes?
There was an awkward silence.
Too afraid to guess? Then let me tell you. One of your eyes is worth $100,000.
Suddenly, a can rolled across the floor in front of Miranda, releasing thick gray smoke.
Hey, what are you doing?
I heard shuffling, then Miranda gasped. My ropes were cut, and as I stood, I rubbed my wrists. "Miranda, I think you've met my mom already," I said as I nodded in her direction. As the gas disappeared, I walked over to Miranda and held her face tightly. Her arms were tied behind her back, and Mom was holding her arm. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Dmitry Volkov, and I'm a bounty hunter. Do you know how much you and your grandmother are worth? There are people in very high places that you took some things from that want revenge." I waited a few seconds before replying. "Too afraid to guess? Then let me tell you. Each of you is worth $250,000. That definitely trumps the $100,000 for one of my eyes, don't you think? So I guess you've guessed by now, huh? I'm not who I said I was. I'm a bounty hunter, and I only used Miranda to gain her trust. Well, she did the same thing to me, so I guess it's only what she deserved, right?" I turned to my mom. "Is the grandmother down and out?" Mom smiled.
Like a newborn baby.
"Okay, let's get this show on the road. There is money to be made." Mom escorted Miranda outside to the black panel van where Dad was already waiting. Mom threw her in the back of the van and, just like her grandmother, tied her arms to the metal rod above their heads. Once she was secured, Dad, Mom, and I hopped into the front of the van. There was a slight drizzle which quickly turned into a heavy downpour. The traffic began to pile up and Mom looked at her watch.
We've got to get to the airstrip in 1 hour or we'll miss our chance.
Don't worry.
Dad said, focused on the road.
We've never missed a deadline, and we aren't going to miss one now. We have a helpless old woman and a teenage girl. How much trouble could they be?
Suddenly, we felt the van rock slightly, followed by a loud bang. My parents and I shared a concerned look. Dad stopped the van, and Dad and I went to check it out.
Gamut!
Dad slammed his fist into the side of the van when he noticed that the door to the van was open and our bounty had escaped. Dad and I quickly searched the jam-packed streets. A short way ahead, I see Miranda and her grandmother's head bobbing between the cars. I was amazed at the swiftness and agility of the older woman. We need to stop them before they reach Lapino Falls, or we'll lose them for good. Lapino Falls was a camping ground not too far from the highway that was densely forested with a stream running through before it formed into a waterfall. Miranda and her grandmother separated once they got off the highway. Dad followed her grandmother and I followed Miranda. Miranda bolted towards the stream that was now raging from the rain. I cornered her between the stream and myself. "You've got nowhere to run, Miranda," I yelled over the rain. As I moved cautiously towards her, she stepped backwards. Her hands flailed in the air and her eyes widened with fright as she slipped backward into the torrential water, which swept her away. Without a second thought, I dove into the water to save Miranda. Luckily for the both of us, a tree had fallen close to the mouth of the waterfall. I was able to grab Miranda before holding onto the tree for dear life. Miranda was able to climb to safety and I followed closely. Once on the bank of the stream, we lay on our backs, gasping for air. Just as Miranda was about to get up and run, I snatched her hand. "You aren't getting away that easily." We got up slowly. For a minute, as we looked into each other's eyes, as we shared a moment, Miranda pulled me in for a deep kiss, and I obliged. The kiss lasted a few seconds before she pulled away.
I really do love you, Dmitry.
She caressed my face. Her face then contorted, and a devilish smile appeared on her face as she pushed me into the stream. I seized a handful of her clothing, and we both stumbled into the water. This time, however, we fell over the 15-foot waterfall and into the pool below. Coughing up water, we both dragged ourselves to shore, looking like two stray cats, soaked and waterlogged. Miranda looked at me weirdly as she asked in a raspy voice,
What's wrong with your eye?
I coughed and then chuckled. "Oh, that? I had special contacts made just so I could get on your radar and win your trust. After that, everything else was easy." Before I knew what was happening, Miranda slammed a large branch into my stomach that knocked the wind out of me. When she swung it at me again, I grabbed the stick and threw it into the water. My parents always told me to never hit girls, but this was an exception. I scrambled to my feet quickly and Miranda and I squared off. She threw the first punch and I returned rapid fire, hitting her squarely in the jaw. She stumbled backwards but was quickly able to regain her footing. "Don't make me hurt you," I yelled.
You can try.
Miranda replied as she hit me with a kick in the middle of my chest that sent me flying backwards. Our fight went on for a few minutes as punches and kicks flew through the air. I was finally able to get the upper hand and pin her down.
Dmitry,
Mom's voice came through to the clearing.
are you okay?
"Yep, just another day on the job." Mom handed me a pair of handcuffs that I quickly placed on Miranda. Mom led me to the van that was just outside the forested area. Miranda's grandmother was already chained in the van, and we placed Miranda next to her. This time, Dad stayed in the back of the van while Mom took the wheel. By the time we got back on the road, the sun was peeking out from behind the clouds, and it had stopped raining. We arrived 15 minutes late to the drop-off.
You're late.
Raul, a big muscular guy, announced when we opened the van doors.
Oh, Raul.
Mom replied smoothly.
What's 15 minutes between friends? You know we always deliver.
Mom batted her eyes at him. A small smile crept to Raul's lips.
Ah, yes, the grandmother-granddaughter duo. My boss can't wait to get a hold of you.
Raul rubbed his hands together menacingly as Dad took Miranda and her grandmother out of the van.
I'll make you suffer if it's the last thing I do, Dimitri.
Miranda spat at my feet before she was dragged to the small airplane. Dad collected the money and counted it before we bade Raul farewell. As we headed home, I couldn't help but reminisce at the fun times and special moments that Miranda and I shared. A few years passed, and we had stopped a bounty hunting business after my parents retired and moved to Tobago to live. I got married to a beautiful woman named Onika, and we had a beautiful daughter, Rebecca. Every morning, I held my 7-year-old hand and walked her to the end of the street to wait for the school bus. As we saw the bus coming up the street, I gave her a hug, told her I loved her, and to have a great day at the school. The school bus stopped in front of us and the door slid open. Rebecca waved at me.
Bye, Daddy.
As she got on, I looked up to smile at the bus driver, Rosie, and the blood drained from my face. In the seat where Rosie sat for the past 2 years, sat Miranda. I attempted to dive into the bus, but the doors closed and I bounced off them. As the bus pulled off, I noticed Rebecca by the window, and next to her was Miranda's grandmother. "Open the door! Open the door!" I screamed as I slammed the palm of my hand against the bus as I ran alongside it. The bus sped off, leaving me in the middle of the road. I placed my hands on my head and sank to my knees. No!